Hello, welcome. So I'm going to do a little reading of Plato's Republic, the section on education of the Guardians, specifically with music. The musical education of the Guardians. I'm going to see what is this about. Um, if you flick through this or you read, the Republic very quickly or something, you probably only remember music as this brief little section where they discuss like what kind of music should be allowed for the training and education of the guardians, and um, what instruments. And it seems very practical. It's almost like when you're in school, you might learn a second language, you might learn a musical instrument, and it kind of seems largely pointless or just for the sake of passing time or whatever. But this is actually specifically in context to Plato's larger work, which we're going to see here. So, music is introduced as having three different aspects to it: words, mode, and rhythm. So, words, obviously, the words in the song, like in a poem, the words written, spoken, sung. Mode refers to kind of more like genre or style. I mean, in modern terms, you might think of like rock music or blues music or classical music. Here, we're going to discuss it more in like regional character, different aspects of Greece, like Eastern Greece, Western Greece, what mode. We're going to discuss basically kind of different styles of music in terms of geographic region. And rhythm, I would say it's more like rhythm. I mean, it's the kind of embodied, universal aspect of music, right? Um, it, One way you could look at rhythm is kind of mathematically, and to say, if you'll see music from India or music from Europe or music from Russia, and it's all got mathematically similar rhythms. You can have like 1/4 time, 2/4 time, half a beat, blah 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 blah. You can mathematically see that rhythms are similar or the notes are similar. Like there's a scale of notes, right? And that's it's not like there's different notes in Russia to India. I mean, like they may tend towards using certain notes more than others, certain scales more than others, but there's a kind of mathematical universality to time signatures and keys, right? So that's one aspect you could look at rhythm. The other aspect, rhythm would be more embodied, like the rhythm of life. The sun comes up in the morning and it goes down in the evening. Your heart has a rhythm, a rhythmic beat. Your blood flow has a rhythmic sense. Your body has rhythmic aspects to it. Life in a more larger cosmic, ontological, biological sense is rhythmic, right? So you could kind of map on those three aspects to music by saying something like words represents logos, mode represents like nomos, maybe convention, culture, and more particularities, and rhythm could be. I mean, it could be the cosmos. It could be bios as well, like life, just biological life. So next we talk a little bit about. I guess we start with modes, styles of music. Um, there's styles of music. I mean, which is broken into region, and there's styles of music which is broken into different sort of we're going to talk about laments, for example, a lament for someone when they die, um, versus other sorts of music, right? So anyway, I'll just read. But we agreed, as far as the words are concerned, to dispense with dirges and laments, did we not? We did. Then tell me, you are a musician, which are the modes suitable for dirges? The mixed Lydian and the extreme Lydian are similar modes. Then we can reject them, I said. Even women, if they are respectable, have no use for them, let alone men. Quite right. So, dirges and laments, which is generally music which is for kind of sad music for expressing grief, um, is not suitable to be included in the education of the guardians. I don't think Plato is excluding this from the whole society, but from specifically the education of the guardians. And this kind of music is associated with the Lydian and extreme Lydian. And the Lydian basically are areas of Greece in the east, which would be kind of Asia Minor, kind of modern day Turkey. These are the regions that are more Lydian, and I suppose maybe they were known for having very culturally they could be known for their dirges and for their laments, and these are sort of cast as being not suitable for the education of the guardians. So we can assume, because the guardians need to be disciplined and strong and courageous, and that this is a perhaps demoralizing form of music. It's for expressing sadness and so on. So this is not an appropriate kind of song for a guardian to learn. So then we'll continue on. But drunkenness, softness, or idleness are also qualities most unsuitable in a guardian, of course. What then are the relaxing modes and the ones we use for drinking songs? The Ionian and certain Lydian modes, commonly described as languid. So this is the Ionian mode, and Ionian again is associated with the eastern part of Greece and of ancient Greece, and this nomos, we could say, this mode, this culture, is also associated with being more unwarlike, more democratic, more rationalistic, and having a lot of value on art, poetry, and leisure. So again, for the education of the guardians, which is really what we're talking about here, this is also cast as not being appropriate. So we see certain characteristics being associated with certain cultural regions and, geographic regions, culture, and forms of music. The Ionian kind of drunkenness, softness, idleness, the Lydian tendency to write, dirges and laments. These are kind of cast aside as being inappropriate, and as we continue on, we'll see why. Socrates says, "Will they then," I asked, "be of any use for training soldiers?" "None at all," he replied. "You seem to be left with the Dorian and I'm going to pronounce this wrong. The Dorian and the Phrygian modes." So the Dorian, Phrygian, they're more associated with West Greece, and that's more associated with the Spartans and the sort of disciplined, warlike, soldierly character. So ancient Greece was kind of like literally geographically caught into this distinction in character between East and West. The West was more austere, warlike, disciplinary, and the East was more idle, leisurely, maybe a bit more poetic, and kind of in modern terms, maybe we could say something like more liberal in some sense, right? So Greece is caught in between these two different, Athens, we could say, it's kind of in the middle, caught in between these two different cultures, these two different characteristics. And I think what Plato is doing here, and this fits his larger pedagogical paradigm, is that he wants to fuse these distinct parts into one. He wants to fuse these distinct characteristics into one. And this is a very harmonic task. Whenever Plato describes the fusion of opposing characteristics, he always describes it as a harmonic task. So I'll keep reading. "I'm no expert on modes," said I, "but leave me one that will represent appropriately the voice and accent of a brave man on military service or any dangerous undertaking, who faces misfortune, be it injury or death, or any other calamity, with the same steadfast endurance. And I want another mode to represent him in the voluntary, non-violent occupations of peacetime. For instance, persuading someone to grant a request, praying to God or instructing or admonishing his neighbor, or again submitting himself to the request or instruction or persuasion of others and acting as he decides. And in all showing no conceit but moderation and common sense and willingness to accept the outcome. Give me these two modes, one stern, one pleasant, which will best represent sound courage and moderation in good fortune or in bad. So, two different modes. He wants two different modes and he wants to fuse them into one. This is representative of the larger point of the Guardians, which is to fuse together kind of wisdom and temperance with courage and military prowess. These two opposing elements are being fused together. And we're seeing that fusion also happen in this sense, kind of in discussion of music as a whole. Like the purpose of music as a whole is, in a sense, to harmonize different aspects, or perhaps to accentuate and emphasize different aspects. Okay, so next we talk about the instruments that we're going to use. And again, this is maybe seeming kind of pointless and stupid and trivial, but actually there's something to it if you read between the lines. So there we go. I keep reading. The two modes you were asking for, he rejoined, are the two I've just mentioned. And so I went on, we shan't need for our music and song a multiplicity of strings or a wide harmonic range. Apparently not. We shan't therefore keep craftsmen to make instruments of many strings or wide range, like harps and zithers. I have no idea what zithers are. I suppose not. Then will you allow flutes and flute makers in our city? Has not the flute the widest range of all, being in fact the original which other instruments of wide range imitate? That's plain enough, he said. We are left then with the lyre and the kithara for use in our city. Though the shepherds in the country might have some sort of pipe. That seems to be the conclusion of our argument. We aren't really doing anything revolutionary, you know, my dear Glaucon, I said, in preferring Apollo and his instruments to Marsyas and his. So I think here there's, I'm going to talk a bit about Apollo and Marsyas because there's a bit of a backstory behind that reference, but generally we see an emphasis on minimalism and an emphasis on minimalism and discipline and order over luxury and drunkenness, or something we could say. Plato doesn't want instruments that have too wide a range of notes, and like the harp, for example, it's almost like it's a bit decadent. It's like too many notes. You don't need that many notes. It's almost a bit punk rock, I think, to say you don't need this many notes. You can have an old, cheap guitar, and you can make much better music from a kind of limited range of notes and simplicity. Simplicity makes for a better composition than a kind of decadent multitude of pointless, kind of excessive notes, like a harp. I think actually you could sort of compare not just. Interestingly enough, I think you could compare like punk music to like classical music here, and say classical music this will not be a popular opinion, I don't think, among many people today who maybe like to think of classical music as being traditional and noble, and punk music is decadent. But there's a kind of punk rock argument going on here. Simplicity and discipline is preferable, at least for the education of the Guardians, to something more complex and luxury and so forth. So different tastes and different understandings of what makes a good composition, I think, are going on here. The reference to Apollo and Marsyas is, again, you can find this stuff on Wikipedia pretty easily, but is a reference to a mythological contest between Marsyas, who was a satyr, and Apollo, and they had a kind of musical contest which Apollo won. And just to read a little piece from Wikipedia, because I think it's quite it's a good little paragraph. It says, one strand of modern comparative mythology regards the domination of Marsyas by Apollo as an example of myth that recapitulates a supposed supplanting by the Olympian pantheon of an earlier Chthonic heroic ancestors and nature spirits, or a religion of Chthonic heroic ancestors and nature spirits. Marsyas was a devotee of the ancient mother goddess Rhea, who's also known in some regions as Cybele. You will know this if you're familiar with Dugan. You'll know the Sibyllian the Sibyllian logos. So we have here also a reference, I think, that cuts many different ways. Again, emphasis on kind of order and simplicity over luxury and multitude. We also have, I think, a reference to the Olympian gods as being preferable to the kind of pre-Olympian gods. The gods, again, like, the Olympian gods are sky gods. They're very kind of orderly, they're very orderly and masculine. And then you have the more Chthonic gods, who are often associated with mother goddesses, with the feminine. Obviously, these are very simplistic and very simple, categories to put this stuff in, but roughly speaking, there's something to this, and Plato is preferring the Apollonian, I think, and the orderly and the simplistic here. Okay, I'm going to split this into two parts, but the last little passage that is important here is on the sort of relationship between rhythm and words. So if you remember, we've kind of discussed modes now, and if we discuss rhythm and words, we'll see that there's a bit of a contention between rhythm and words. Should the words be something that adapt themselves to the rhythm, or should the rhythm adapt themselves to the words? I mean, if you ever written music before, if this is a good example, if I remember, I played in a little rock band when I was like a fucking teenager or something, and I remember like having this exact conversation with the band. It was like the singer was like, okay, should I write lyrics now and then you write music to accompany that, or should we just write a musical song, jam something out, and then I'll write lyrics to that, right? So there was this conversation about like what should come first, like the chicken or the egg, the music or the words and the lyrics. So it's an interesting question, right? And we have this being referred to here in this passage. I'll continue reading. He says, "Well, let us continue the purge," said I. After mode, we should presumably deal next with rhythm. We shan't want very elaborate or varied combinations, but merely need to find which rhythms suit a life of courage and discipline. We shall then adapt the beat and tune to the appropriate words, and not the words to the beat and the tune. So, and again, I think you could say something there like the rhythm is being adapted to the words, which means Plato is emphasizing the primacy and hierarchy of the logos over the rhythm, which I don't know, could stand for bios, it could stand for something else. Logos is being given its primacy here. So Plato is conducting a sort of restructuring of the whole musical phenomena, and he's sort of breaking it down into these parts, and he's sort of hierarchically ordering it and comparing different modes and seeing which ones are more compatible and more appropriate for the education of the guardian, of course, which is what this is all about. So again, I'll probably do a second section because there's more to say about this, but I think we can roughly say that when we look at the section on music with Plato, we're looking at not like let's learn instruments or music for the sake of it, or merely for aesthetics, merely for aesthetic purposes, but we're thinking about rhythm as a sort of expression of character and an expression of culture. In some sense, it's something which harmonizes bios, the catonic bios, rhythmic, maybe cosmic aspects of existence with the more rational aspects, particular aspects of existence, and it also expresses a particular regional character, the Dorian and the Lydian and the Ionian. It expresses something about that region. Their style of music expresses something about their character, and we're seeing which aspects are more compatible with other aspects. And generally speaking, I think it's important because the cultivation of the character which Plato wants for guardians is a fusion between kind of military prowess and warlike courage with prudence and temperance and wisdom. And these are very like opposing characteristics. So to fuse them together is kind of a paradox. It requires a kind of musical harmonic aspect. They don't fit together neatly in some sort of mechanical sense. This is a harmonic and therefore a musical task.